Almost 2 years after the Egyptian people toppled their longtime leader, hundreds of thousands are rising up again, angry with the man who replaced him. More than 200,000 people have packed into Tahrir Square in Cairo. The scene looks a lot like the rallies that led to the downfall of Hosni Mubarak. Protesters are accusing the current president, Mohammed Morsi, of trying to turn himself into a strongman leader like Mubarak was. Last week, President Morsi issued a decree giving himself near absolute powers, meaning his decisions cannot be challenged by the courts. As the crowd swelled in Tahrir Square, clashes broke out nearby. Hundreds of young protesters threw stones at police, who fired back with tear gas. Joining us now, Pamela Falk, CBS News Foreign Affairs analyst. Pam, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Terrell.
The White House saying that this is part of the democratic process and this needs to be handled within Egypt. What are the chances that the U.S. somehow gets involved?
Well, the White House is trying to give Egypt breathing room on their own domestic policy, and this comes on the heels of Secretary of State Clinton going there to work with the Egyptians, work with the UN to try to negotiate the ceasefire with Gaza and Israel. Now, that said, the U.S. gives an awful lot of aid, and that has already led U.S. senators, including Senator John McCain, to say maybe that aid should be withheld if this doesn't back down, if Morsi doesn't back down. And that's a direct influence, and it's just what the White House is trying not to do.
One moment, the U.S. praising Egypt for helping to broker that truce between Israel and Hamas, and then this happened. How much of a concern is there about the relationship between the U.S. and Egypt?
Big concern, very big concern. Egypt is key in the Middle East. Egypt is key to Israel's security. And so all of that comes at a time when people were worried about the Muslim Brotherhood leadership in Egypt of winning the election 2 years ago and overthrowing Mubarak. How would this change the Camp David Accords? And he is keeping everything in place with Israel, and trying to negotiate between, he has on the one side, he's got radical Islamists who would like to break all the agreements with Israel, and on the other side, he has the young generation who haven't been included, the Wild Ghanims, remember the Google, Facebook generation that really started all the protests in Tahrir Square, and they want more democracy. So they're negotiating a constitution, and all of this is part of his decision to make these decrees. Now, it's likely he'll back down on some of them, and that's what his Supreme Judicial Council is seeming to imply that he should do.
What are we going to see here? Because, I mean, Pam, we have really seen these protests ramp up. So what is he going to do? Is he going to backtrack completely? What are some of the options that he's facing?
Well, the most likely option, and one of the options, is that he back down on some of the decree, which gave him immunity from virtually all judicial oversight, and make it only a decree that removes judicial oversight for big decisions, going to war, breaking relations, and leave the rest to the courts. And that's what he may do, and that's one of the options. The other option is he doesn't back down at all, and the protests continue. And the other option is he totally backs down. But all of those are treacherous. He has to tread, I mean, the U.S. has to tread, and all outside powers have to tread very carefully, because in this ceasefire, he was key to being able to speak to Hamas, which is Muslim Brotherhood, and Israel, and create an indirect link for talks. That he was able to do in addition to dealing with all the UN Secretary General and all of those things put together. Now, that gives him a great deal of ability to negotiate peace in the region, but it also, he's nervous that the Constitution and that he needs his decrees to get the Constitution moving forward, because the courts already dissolved the Constitution writing part of the Assembly. So his supporters say there's a reason for this.
On Thursday coming up, big meeting at the UN concerning the Palestinians and changing their statehood status, becoming an observer state. Do we know what's going to happen at that meeting?
It is likely that the resolution will pass, and what it does is largely symbolic. It doesn't give Palestine membership in the UN. It changes its name, basically, its status from observer entity to observer state. As far as the Palestinians are concerned, that means the UN is calling them a state. It also gives them entree entree to all the specialized agencies of the UN, with the World Health Organization, ECOSOC, UNICEF, and those are threatened with cutoffs if Palestine does join. But all of it said, it may very well help the peace process because Hamas, which always opposed this bid, now has endorsed it. So you might see some unity on the Palestinian side going into negotiations.
And that will likely pass.
And this resolution, it will likely pass. All they need is a simple majority, which is 51% of 193 countries. They're walking into it with almost 60 and probably a lot more.
CBS News foreign affairs analyst Pamela Falk joining us this morning. Pam, appreciate the insight. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Terrell.